big issue of the rise of the right is the failure of the left. But this, of course, happens in a context of neoliberalization, of the exhaustion of welfare state politics.
Hello, welcome to our Common Concern, the podcast. I'm Xiang Biao, a co-director of the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology, Halle, Germany. This podcast is part of our effort to develop the Common Concerns approach. The Common Concerns approach is an analytical strategy with which we do research in a way that at the end of the research, we go back to our interlocutors and tell them what we found out, what kind of concepts we develop, and what kind of new question we raise. And our interlocutors listen to us and say, wow, that is interesting, and that is something that bothered me for a while, but I have not thought of this problem in this way. Now, with this concept, I feel probably I can see more things in my life and see things more clearly. And therefore, I probably I can do something about my life in these circumstances, even though I cannot change the circumstances itself. We propose the Common Concerns approach because we realized that today we are doing social research in a context that is very different from even 20 years ago. The massification of the higher education means that the public, especially in the global south, are much better educated than before. With the unprecedented development in communication technologies, people, and especially young people, have wide access to information, and they have all kinds of ways to express their opinions. They have all kinds of questions in their life, especially today with the climate crisis, the threat of AI technology or the blessing of AI technology we don't know yet, and all kinds of global uncertainties. They have many questions, and there is many good questions because they think a lot. And what they want from researchers is not only simple answers or solutions. And if we give them so-called expert answers, probably they will not take them. And they will be very skeptical about these so-called expert views from the outside. What they want instead is often tools for thinking, concepts, perspectives, new hypotheses or questions with which they can think of what they are worried about in their life in their own way. So this is what the Common Concerns approach research wish to deliver. So ideally, this type of research is an exercise of thinking together with our interlocutors. And this is quite an early stage for us to develop this approach. So in the department, all our researchers, day in and day out, thinking and debating with each other, is this feasible? What is the limit? What is the value of this approach? Today, we are very pleased to have a special guest, our global friend, Professor Don Kalb, come to debate with us about the potential values and the limit of this approach. And also join me is my colleague, Xenia, who will lead the discussion today. So Xenia, over to you.
Well, Don, thanks for coming. We are delighted to welcome you here on the Common Concerns podcast. And especially so because you've got a new book out, which just came out this year. It's called Value and Worthlessness.
Yes.
You get a shot at that?
Big book.
Big book, yep. And it began actually here at our institute in 2013 with this working paper, which just happens to have the same title.
Oh, you also dig that out.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. So I'm really happy to have you come back here and talk about something that began here. And I must say I found the book completely dazzling. I found it marvelous. It works on all these different levels. It's this major overview of the history of capitalism in Europe, and it's a detailed microhistory, and it's an autobiography, and in a way it's also a manifesto, I think, calling for a new type of Marxist anthropology. So congratulations, first of all, on having this amazing book out. And my first question is, what changed since I mean, look at the difference here. Why should we read the extra 400 pages? What changed?
Over how many years?
Over about 12 years.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Wonderful introduction. Thank you. It's a fantastic opportunity for me to talk about the book and about what changed. Well, that was really absolutely the beginning that I started to think about value. And over time, I became increasingly aware what the huge possibilities are of thinking about value, in particular when you are interested in contradictions, which I am, right? Because value brings together a whole vocabulary and social phenomena that are about, use value. Those are the things that we cherish in our daily life, in our social reproduction, things that we share with each other. Use value in a sort of very extended sense, right? So not use value a la Aristotle or Marx, and then you get a story about a table or any other sort of object. But use value in the sort of sense that I think for anthropologists and for Marxists is very important. As a sort of biographic accumulation of use values. Of the things that you build up in your life, that you are, the person is interwoven with that. It's relational. I call it, relational use values very often. It's the world that you build up, that you have a feel of having a serious biographical stake in, but also vice versa, others in you, right? So use value is, I think, a fantastic sort of field, conceptual field, a living field, a political field, that overlaps with the commons, it overlaps with the common concerns, and it overlaps with what we call everyday politics. But of course, use value happens certainly from a Marxist perspective, but not only a Marxist perspective. It happens in a context where exchange values circulate. You relate to exchange values all the time. Exchange values change all the time. Exchange values perhaps the concept of the 20th century. Welfare states work with it, markets work with it, fiscality works with it, etc., etc. So in many ways, it's both a liberal and a very sort of Marxist concept. Of course, it's attached to the market. But there is also surplus value, right? So you have use values, you have exchange values, and you have surplus values. Exchange value is the big thing of the 20th century, building up of institutions. Use value is the big thing for anthropologists in particular. And then there is surplus value. Now, when you start to think about the dialectics between the three of them, then you allow yourself to see how capital and capital accumulation and liquidity and finance increasingly injects itself into our world of use values in the form of housing, the form of education, in the form of urban economies, national economies. Indebtedness is of course a key concept there. Credit is a key concept. Welfare states are at their final point of taking fiscal takes out of national GDP. Right? It's somewhere between 40 and 55%. It's very difficult for them to take more than that. So that whole exchange value field is not something where a lot of new politics can emerge.
Well, what I found so interesting about the book and what I really liked about it is how grounded, all of these large theoretical ideas, how grounded they are in the life histories of the people that talk to you.
Yeah.
And I want to get to that.
Okay.
But I want to go back to this 2016 moment for just a second, because in the book, you begin with an essay of Biao's, which is called Theory as Vision. And so I wanted to ask you what changed between theory and vision and theory as vision and common concerns. And then starting from this same place, we'll see how we get between the two of you to the present moment.
It changed in terms of my perception, the type of research I do. Great question. And I think what Dong just told us, I think for me will be a excellent example of theory as a vision. Because here it is a theory, the relation between the three values, but it is not a theory to indicate any straight line causality. And it cannot be expressed in a flat model or a state or a form of statement. It is to say the three things are interconnected in a complex dialectical way, and the way how they interconnect to each other forms a condition under which our life unfolds, right? So it is a kind of a vision here. Actually, in English, it probably sounds like it's a future-oriented goal, but I was thinking in Chinese word 途径, which is closer to picture, the notion of picture. But but the picture is not a flat picture; it's a kind of rounded setting. Yeah. So, 2016, I wrote that piece. I want to say that theory for me is not a model or statement, but it is like building a little hut, a little house, have different facets. I mean, it's a house not like this square house, but there's many facets, complex house, and it's rounded, and it's a house where you can open the door, enter, and stand there. The house is to help you find a position, a viewpoint about the world. So with that house, you can see the world in a clearer manner. So that is theory as a vision is a kind of build around the picture.
It's kind of like a house's window. Kind of.
Yeah. And enable you to investigate various specific questions. Okay. And what changed? I think that at that time I was not thinking of a common concerns approach. But the idea that the theory should be something like that is there. And now the common concern approach is to say, I want to build this kind of house, not only for myself, not only for peer scholars, but I want to open it for the people who have told me their stories. So I want to share this theory as a vision, the theory as a house with them.
Very hospitable.
Yes, and they can come in. And then, of course, they say, oh, this house doesn't fit. I mean, I'm not very comfortable because it's blocking my view, which is quite important, something. The mountain is very important, but I can't see from here. Then we'll probably, open a new window and etc. But the idea is that then having the house provide such a vantage, point of view, and I hope it will sharpen certain type of consciousness in life. Then probably people will have more agency and feel more empowered.
Well, I love this. I love the idea of theory as house into which you invite people, and of course individual people and their individual stories. And that's the other thing that I really liked about your book. How between these highly theoretical levels, right, and these very, very large histories. I mean, at one point you go back to the second millennium, the beginning of the second millennium, which is huge. I mean, it's like, I mean, it's 400 pages, but it's still a big span of time. And there's all these theoretical works in there too, but it's so intimate. Your writing is very intimate, and the stories are very intimate. And it's somehow all of these levels, they work together. I found that it works very well together. And I think that it works because it remains throughout grounded in the local, right? In these people that come into the house. And in their particular intimate struggles and in their stories. And I'm wondering, I want to ask you how this works. And specifically, I mean, you say that it works for something you call hidden histories. Hidden histories. And so I wanted to ask you what that is. What is a hidden history?
Very good.
Because you say that your own autobiography is also a hidden history.
And of course, hidden histories hits immediately at common concerns.
Right.
Because they are hidden, and so they cannot be voiced so easily yet as a common concern.
But everyone knows it's there.
But everyone has a feeling.
Yeah.
Everyone has a sense that, those things actually are there. And they play themselves out in ways that we cannot entirely control. So hidden histories sort of, they hit you at the moment where you are surprised about your own life, and about your own set of relationships, relationships of use value, exchange value, and surplus value. And but since they are hidden, there is a quest for people like anthropologists, but basically for all of us, I don't think that anthropologists are, a case apart. We are we only sort of, we craft, perhaps more than others, a particular capability that we all have. But the anthropologist, I think, who wants to contribute to common concerns beyond what is easy to talk about and what the media pick up and what social media articulates, should be very interested in these hidden histories. And so hidden histories is a set of unfolding relationships that are generally local, global, intimate, lived, that you are not fully in control of.
Can you give us an example?
That sort of surpass you at all sorts of moments. And of course, I give in that preface to the book, I give a sort of, the way I perceive my own hidden history. Because my career, and you probably also have the same sort of experience. My career developed in ways that I could never have anticipated. And of course, that's true for most human lives, that you only anticipate a little bit of what you become. That is because we cannot anticipate the future. But the future is, a set of unfolding hidden histories that flow in time. So that preface was very important for me to also explain what that hidden history does also in my own sort of life. So why it brought me to Central and Eastern Europe, to Post-Socialism, and then from the Netherlands to Budapest, Central European University, totally different type of university than I had known until then. And then later back further up north to Norway, in surprise. So hidden history is for me another way to talk about surprise. But surprise is perhaps more directly ethnographic, right?
But so
surprise
it's not Benjaminian. It's not that kind of history.
What?
It's not Benjaminian history. It's not the history that remains unsaid when the dominant history is written at something else.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is that? Interesting. So in the book, though, the book features 2 very long interviews, which come from different projects. Right. And they're similar in that they're both interviews with former workers talking about their own lives in these ways that, you notice them sort of talking about how their lives have been worthless. And then you sort of, from that, you uncover a hidden history.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that. But before, I wanted to ask you methodologically, and both of you, actually, I wanted to ask both of you how you understand the truth of interview. Because, I work with interviews too, and interviews of people talking about the past. And, people talking about what happened to them 20 years ago, perspectives shift, viewpoints change. People are also wrong, often.
Yeah.
So, in my own work, I asked people about Soviet times. And then I realized actually what they were telling me were stories that happened in the 90s. So actually were not chronologically correct. They were correct in other ways, but chronologically they were wrong. So how do you deal with that? When you're writing a historical ethnography, it's a historical text also. It's about what actually did happen in the past. But you begin with what people say happened in the past. So how do you understand that truth claim?
Yeah. Of course, you don't use oral history in order to make, narrowly historical discoveries. It's not reliable for that.
Yeah.
But the interviews that I do with people start out in principle. They cover their whole lives, right? And so they also talk about their parents, grandparents, and things, places that they're in. But I'm in particular interested in all sorts of small interactions that they remember. The shape of social relationships that emerges out of narrating those interactions. As anthropologists, I think we, more than any other sort of social discipline, we try to put our fingers on, on society, on the regular form of social interactions, transactions, relationships. And that form can vary a lot in very subtle ways, beyond the concept of society, like, a Norwegian or a Belgian or a particular type of what. So you want to open up that micro world of social relationality. And that is what I really distill out of interviews. So it's really something very different from what historians tend to do. Even though there are, of course, excellent oral historians that do something like that. Yeah. So it's really about the shape of social relations.
and how people remember them and the details.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How people remember them, what the usual ways are of narrating them, what their own surprises in that are, etc. Yeah.
Well, I asked about the truth of interview because Biao, your ongoing project, as I understand it, is a really interesting one. You had this best-selling book in China, Self-As Method, which is very, very successful. And then since then, people have been approaching you and telling you their stories. And so I wanted to ask you what you do with that. I mean, how do you understand the truth of those kind of stories? I mean, not only is it an interview-based truth, but it's also, it's an ego document. Somebody wants to tell you this. Like, how do you work with that as a scholar?
Oh, yeah. First of all, I would like to distinguish historical and biographical. And we do need a historical sensibility, though this moment is what kind of moment is this, and why young people experience this, and why do they express their experiences in particular way now. There is a historical context. But the biographical is not necessarily same as historical. When people talk about biographical, the purpose is not to say how one thing leads to another, but rather is I'm trying to understand my being, my life now.
That's a really good point.
And I wanted to make a narrative about my life as I see it now, while I realize actually it's shaped by what happened before. But whether or not what happened before really happened in that way, and even the sequence is correct or not, it's a different matter. So how do I understand the stories, as you said, the ego stories offered to me? Number one, I see it as an invitation to think together. Why do they bother telling me all that? Because they want someone to think with them about their life experiences, and think about life experiences following the logic or the problems that emerging from the experience itself, rather than by imposing any framework or concept or doctrines from outside. Because there's plenty, this kind of external framing out there. This is number one, is an invitation to think together. So this is how I start. So it's what I do with this material. Start a conversation. Start a conversation. Don't treat it as material. Treat it as an invitation letter. But it's a very, very rich invitation letter. And then number two, there is lots of factual descriptions about what happened to them and how they deal with that and what they think. And all these materials, for me, it is, of course, it's real. It is how they feel about their life. Nobody, especially me, are in the position to say, the way you feel about your life is wrong. You should have feel about your life differently. Who is in the position to say that? This is their narrative. So it's 100% authentic. And in that sense, so I have to take it 100% seriously. And then to analyze, why do they feel there is a problem there, and what kind of issue bother them, and how we can respond to them. So when respond to them, it's really speaking to them. It's not speaking about them to someone else.
I see. Well, that's a great distinction between history and biography. Or history and autobiography that you made. I completely agree with you, 100%. And that's the other thing that's really interesting about both of your work and the way that it speaks to each other, is that it's actually profoundly autobiographical. Both of you both start writing from your own intellectual histories. And of course, ethnography is always autobiographical in the sense that the ethnographer, goes to the field and then writes based on what he or she experienced there. And, but you do something else, I think. I think you both bring your own intellectual autobiographies to the work. And this works rhetorically. I think it's a great move in the books. It makes you believable. Makes me empathize with you. I think it works. But I wanted to ask analytically what it does, because I think it actually also does something for your projects to start with yourselves in this way. So,
yeah, Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to sort of put these perspectives into conversation. Of course, my work is more historical than yours is.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't draw that sharp distinction between biography and history, because for me, biographies and, you know, whole collection of biographies is about, well, you know, the substance of a lived history, right? And which I must place in a longer process that you know, everybody calls history. And so I usually talk about periods of, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, but in the context of even longer time periods. And so that's why I think hidden history might be more significant in my approach than for yours. Yeah. But those are nuances of difference. You know, I think the important thing about this sort of ethnographic exploration of lived lives is also to hear people talk beyond what we can get from social media and all sorts of stuff, which is nowadays the reservoir of knowledge for much of the social sciences, plus, of course, social surveys, which are extremely superficial. So you have the superficial identity politics driven social media stuff that responds to, you know, and it's allocated to you on the basis of your very particular, you know, capitalist motives. But we try to catch something that is much more substantial. This is really about lived lives and well, you know, the use value of lived lives, which brings us to why particular lives can talk about being worthless, right?
Yeah. Did you want to answer, or do you? Can I?
Well, I just very quickly. I think it's another interesting point is about the relation between autobiographical, on one side, the question of autobiographical intervention and the positionality. Because in anthropology, people have talked about positionality for a long time. You know, for example, I am a man from China and have a good job, secure the job, and I look at the issues in this or that way. So positionality is very structural and very spatial in a way, and you try to define the relation between you and your informants according to a social map. But I feel, I don't know whether Dong thinks that way, autobiographical, for me, is deeper. Because the life, as you said, the life lived cannot be pinned down to a social map in a spatial metaphor. Because the life is duration. And if I go back
full
to,
of contradictions.
Yes, and it's a flow. And the way that my life has been lived by me and flowed over the last 50 years and etc. And then now I'm looking at the life that has unfolded for 25 years. My interlocutors are much younger than me. And I cannot simply think in a structural term, what's a relation? But I have to think of this kind of a temporal and even there's a kind of a flow metaphor. The two lives flow in parallel. We never really come across. But now we want to make an intellectual, as you said, analytical attempt to bring these two flows of life together, connected through conversation, through thinking together. For me, I mean, this is, you ask the analytical value of autobiographical. For me, it is probably very important for common concern. I mean, common concern approach doesn't need to bring the self. Researchers have to open themselves up. Otherwise, I mean, it's just not fair. I mean, they open up to you. I mean, you don't open up yourself to them. But they open up. So it's go beyond the question of positionality and has to go into.
I completely agree with that. And I mean, for me, I think autobiography is important. Not specifically not about positionality, because positionality is usually all these identitarian categories, right? Like I am this and that color and whatever. But it's about your intellectual history.
Yes.
So it's actually like this. These are the texts and the conversations that I've thought through, but also, which is also a materialist question, right? These are the regimes of value in which I work, this is what gives me, it's really your power to act in the world.
Yeah.
And, you know, and as you said earlier in seminar, like we bring that to the work and then we see how these histories, our history and the history of the people we talk to, how they mesh and work in conversation with each other. But, you know, what's interesting is, you know, so you go to the field and the field comes to you in your case, but we talk to these other people and they tell us stories, and these stories are often about alienation, worthlessness, and all this stuff. And in both of your work, you are working to see past what the people themselves can see. So you know, Don, in your book, I'll just read it. You write that these stories of worthlessness are deployed in obscuring and revealing what is being appropriated and alienated, how and why, and on whose behalf. So not only revealing, but also obscuring, right? And so there is another level of analysis that you bring to the stories that you hear. And my question is, theoretically, how do you do this? Like, what's the theory? And specifically, in your book, you talk about something you call theory from the East.
Yeah.
Which, as I read it, this is not the intellectual history of scholars in Eastern Europe. It's much more a theory of the experience of the East.
Yeah.
And I was hoping you could talk about that.
I first take a step back.
Sure.
And I want to engage with what you say about flow.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which is very exciting, and I completely agree about flow versus positionality. You need both. That's clear. But for us, I think flow is the more important modus. The interesting thing, of course, is you talk to youth, while I talk mostly to rather old people.
That's a good point.
Right? And of course, by definition, the life of youth is in flow. That's basically the definition of youth. Of course, we know that the period of youth is now until 45 years old, right? Or even a bit older.
Yes.
In the Netherlands, they talk about 65 as youth. But it shows that, I mean, social theorists have talked about, postmodernity as liquid times and so on. I don't want to go there, but it is clear that the flow of youth has become more generalized and more intense and less circumscribed to just a short stretch of years over time in, the development of capitalism.
Yes.
But the interesting thing for me here is that, so I talk to old people, and really they are so old, they are not anymore in the flow, in a way. They're not liquid. You can't say they're liquid. But nevertheless, they keep being surprised in their own life about where it takes them.
Yeah.
So also for them, there is ongoing flow. Yeah, and so that's an interesting thing here. But okay, the worthlessness,
the analysis.
The analysis
that you bring
exactly.
to it.
And that's also where the hidden history again comes in, because the hidden history is a layered thing. Of course, youth cannot really explain themselves as the object and subject of hidden histories because they have so little yet.
Yes.
And that's, of course, an advantage when you talk to older people. It's also a disadvantage in a way, of course. But so the hidden history is a very layered thing. It's it's about intimate relationships. It's intimate lived relationships. It's intimate political experiences, political relationships, the relationship to institution, relationship to political change over time. There's also where the theory from the East comes in, because there is post-socialist transition. There's revolution going on. There's a massive transformation in the nature of social relationships between people and the idea of society, the idea of friendship, the idea of kinship, idea of labor, etc. But that was also the case with my West European interlocutors in an earlier period. And these are, of course, transformations that people narrate in the sense that they come from the outside, right? They capture people unawares, and they take you to places and to feelings and to visions that you would not have anticipated before, right? And so I think the hidden history concept is important here because it allows you to start with the words that people give you about themselves, use values and all of that, biographical use values. This has been important in my life. This is really mine. But at the same time, how these use values have been subject to large-scale transformations that nobody could manage or have control over, right? But nevertheless, you were invited to have an opinion about and to connect your own personal lives to it. So everybody in Eastern Europe, and you know that very well, can talk about capitalist transition or democratic transition.
Yeah.
Everybody would talk about that, and So in that sense, the hidden history is that layered thing where you need to make a set of which are relevant in each case, distinctions about processes and time. That's perhaps also an important thing. I must talk about processes, right? And they must have a certain direction. And so the processes exert a certain force on the lives of people in a way that they do not necessarily always understand the way I understand them. And so you have a conversation about that. That's also where you make discoveries, both for yourself and they make discoveries in that. So the concept of capitalism, for example, was in Eastern Europe for a long while completely absent because, this was a democratic transition.
Yeah,
right. And so this is where worthlessness comes in as my sort of a discovery. So how can, for example, in the Polish cases, all the industrial workers that I have been working with were people who were very actively involved in Solidarność in 1980, 1981, trying to shape history in a democratic way. And then you finally get that democratic opening. And then all sorts of things happen that you never anticipated and that make you feel worthless. Right? And so it's that contradiction and paradox that makes them talk about, these use values and that worthlessness. And so that is what I picked up from it. And then later was able to connect to my earlier Dutch studies.
And then kind of a broad question, but what is the point then? Because I asked because you're both Marxist, sort of. I mean, vaguely in the Marxist field. And Biao specifically, I mean, you are asking for a sort of engaged anthropology, which is not an activist anthropology. It's something else, right? I mean, so there's in one way of understanding, I think, what this common concerns thing is that I made more sense to me, Don, after reading your book, is that it's, kind of a straight up Marxist consciousness raising sort of thing. Like, like people are telling us these narratives of worthlessness, of alienation, double alienation, whatever. They're seeing problems, but they're not seeing why this is happening, right? And so, the classic Marxist would go to the people and say, guess what, guys, it's capitalism, and so forth. And then, by classic Marxist sort of theory, revolution would happen and all this stuff. But what's, in a way, I have two questions. The first question is sort of, what's the point? What are we going after? I mean, I'm assuming it's not revolution. Or is it revolution? I mean, I'd be happy if it was revolution, actually. It's an open question. And the second question is, what sort of analysis do we need? But I'll ask that question later. Let's start with the first one. What's the point of this engagement? What does this engagement seek to do?
Oh, I think engagement is the end of the self. Right?
Yeah.
It's through engagement. I mean, the people, especially young people, look at the mobile phone all the time.
Yeah.
And I want to have some interesting text come to their social media channels that after they read, they feel they can think of their life in a clearer manner. And they feel they are not that powerless because they can see there's cracks and complexity in the life that they can act on. And that's all we want to do. And then the question is that how is that different from the Marxist tradition? I think on the broader picture, it's the same thing. Because we want to be part of history. And we want to break into history and want to make a stir here and there. So I want to be engaged, and we wanted to live our life. To be, I mean, the final message is like no more than that. We wanted to live our life. How do you live life? You feel that the wave of history will touch your body. You create a friction. You make like a swimming in life, and then you write text. The text will go to the life and have some impact. But then, very briefly, how is that different from the more classical form of consciousness raising effort? I think it's quite different because the consciousness raising effort is still modeled on the Enlightenment model, is to say that, we found some truths and we have some theoretical insight, and let's like a bulb. I turn the bulb on and I shed a light on your experiences. For the people who have been in the dark of garden, suddenly see a very different picture. And I think this is what Hegel's image about the theory is as well. I mean, so when the thought were, when the light of thought come to the garden of the German life, and everything changed. And that's the point. That's the point. The human society with Hegel and without Hegel, and with Marx and without Marx, with Mao or without Mao, are ontologically different. The reality are different when you have the ideas or without ideas. Sure. Right. But what we do is slightly different and much more modest. It's not like we have a bulb and we have a torch so we can shed light on your life. You already know. You already have the bulb and the torch in your hand. But we are now working together, just to hold the torch in a particular way. So therefore can help to organize the material in a way that suit the concerns, suit the task of thinking through your concerns better. So it's not light from outside. It is more to reorganize the materials, the experiences from inside. So it is less an effort of interpretation from outside, but it's more an articulation from inside. You're one piece of information, experience, another piece of experience, and you feel their tone. But then you put together, you have add a third piece of experience, a fourth experience. It's all your experience, and you know that. But we put it together. We think more clearly inside, from inside of experience, and then we build a picture. We build a picture without any, I'm making a radical statement. I don't know whether it's possible. I'm not very sure, but this is something I work towards too. Without any artificial language, basically we use everyday language only. Ideally, without additional theoretical framework. And I mean, this is, of course, you have the certain philosophy of language, Wittgenstein, etc. would agree to that. You just use whatever we have, which is life experiences, and build a house of the experiences in order for you to understand the experience better and to act on the experiences better. I think theoretically is possible, but of course we need to work hard to find the example.
In a sense, I mean, it seems to be a question of empowerment. It doesn't have a goal to which it's going.
Yes. The goal has to be determined by the people themselves.
Right. I see. So it's just, you're just giving a plus to lives. I see. Okay. Which seems to be perhaps different than your project.
Well, yeah, I can go along for a long while, but I have no problem with this. And but of course, there's the issue of, and it's where hidden history comes back. There is the issue of hegemony and hegemonic notions. So the way people talk about themselves is not just naturalist. It's also conjunctural and constructed in a particular context of history, power, social dependencies, incapacities and autonomies, right? So everything comes together in that. And so I tend to think that my hidden histories were hidden also because they were anti-hegemonic histories. Histories that, had to be sort of covered up. That people were aware of, but didn't really like to be heard. And in particular, powerful people. Yeah. Right? And here's, for example, the Polish case. So I dug up these relatively powerful stories of Polish workers who are first in 1980 in a fight against the Soviet Union and really existing socialism and Stalinism, then merge slowly into a fight under democratic neoliberal conditions, but feel completely marginalized by then politically, even though in the 1980s they were the center of political life in Poland. And then many of them become simply unemployed and poor people, and others survive in the process. Now, the interesting thing is that in the course of that process, so many of those Polish workers were ready to support the populist radical right rather than the left.
When did that become evident?
That was already evident in 1993, and perhaps a little bit earlier already. But that develops over time. And then by the time I actually come to the field in 1997, there is a massive panic among the intellectuals that, the barbarians are at the gate, right? And of course, all the intellectuals had become very liberal, very neoliberal, even though they were Trotskyists in the early 80s and still perhaps Trotskyists in the late 80s. And so they had really started to completely despise the local working class. And that was something that Polish workers felt intensely. So they had been really dumped by those who were first seen as their allies, right? That's basically the working class East European experience is a core thing of theory from the East. And now, so what I do is I sort of dig up all these stories. I hear these stories, and I agree with you. There's nothing very special. It's we just systematize them. Yeah. We record them, we systematize, bring them together, think longer about them than they themselves do, because we have the time to do that, and they have to work. Yeah, right. And at that moment, you can tell a history. It turns out that digs up these hidden histories of protest against Stalinism, then protest against neoliberalism that turns towards the right because there's basically no one else interested in them. And these stories then get later picked up by a new left in Poland, and then we're talking late 2010s, by the time the left is completely marginalized again by the populist right. The Kaczynski's governments. And the new left, it is, of course, completely lost in how it can connect with the wider population. And then they actually discover my histories, and my histories are used in 2019 at the Warsaw Biennale, where for the first time the left tries to look in a more respectful way towards the Polish working class in order to build new political platforms. Right? And don't forget that in Eastern Europe, progressive intellectuals were entirely against the welfare state. We're entirely against redistribution. Capitalism had to just go its way and make its victims. It was inevitable. So I talk to the victims, and the stories of the victims become then dynamic again at some point for new younger intellectuals who want to do a new sort of politics and be actually more in the substantive sense democratic than the now neoliberal state elites are. So there's this sort of dialectic through time. It's a flow of time. It's not just positionality, but it's positionality in the flow of time, in the flow of politics that makes it dynamic. So in that sense, of course, I gave something back to these, common people, but I wrote in English. I couldn't write in Polish. It was never at that point translated, but then it got translated in the context of the Warsaw Biennale, right, in Polish. And so in a way, it still comes back, right? So we basically give a lot of ammunition for this historical process without being able to, sort of really allocate. So, this is the piece of evidence or the piece of insight that I'm going to give to that group of people. It mostly doesn't work really like that. It's a more diffuse process where we are, again, not entirely in control. Also, that is a hidden history. So about the issue of devaluation, because that's where it becomes portable then for me. And so I talk about the use values and the sense that biographical accumulation is not going very satisfactorily, right? Both in the Dutch case and in the Polish case, but also in the Romanian case. We didn't talk about that one, but that one too, which is much more middle class and much more youth. So biographies do not become as valuable for the owners of the biography as they would have liked to be, which is painful, and there's suffering involved, and lack of health is involved, and all of that. But those are at the same time also just massive processes. They have properties that are recognizable across space and across time, and so that is where I developed that concept of devaluation, where I see capitalist processes over time also being systematically involved in the devaluation of particular groups of people.
Well, let me ask you one thing about what you just said.
Yeah.
Talking about Poland, you said that that these people turned to the right wing because no one else was interested in them. And that seems to me to be an answer of like that doesn't engage, or that seems to me to be an explanation that doesn't engage with what the right is offering. It just seems to be like, well, nobody else is working with these people. The right is. But is there something else going on? I mean, is the right offering a commons?
Yeah, no. Yeah. And of course, that's a shorthand.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, that is not entirely true.
Yeah.
And so there's much more organic development there than I can, quickly give here.
Yeah. I guess I'm asking, is there anything positive in the right?
Yeah.
Because
so it's very interesting that the whole sort of the whole cohort around Kaczynski and the new right in Poland was in the early 1990s, was, let us say, the second tier of the Solidarność movement. So the first tier are the intellectuals that become the state class, the neoliberal state class after 1989. And this is the second tier that is much closer to the workers that I talk with, and in fact interspersed in all sorts of ways, kinship, friendship. They see each other a lot. My people are organized. And this, they together develop the sense of, we Polish workers are being treated very badly by an elite that used to be our ally. An elite that openly declares that Polish workers are worthless and so don't deserve a welfare state, don't deserve support for their strikes, all of that. And so it is in that context of this sort of, it's about deservingness in a way, right?
Yeah.
So this attack on the dignity of the Polish working class, as I found it, that they developed this right wing. We are Polish workers and we deserve better than we get, right? So this nationalism is much more organically involved here than just the absence of a left. But of course, in post-socialism, the left is everywhere, discredited. Marxist languages cannot be used. In the late 90s, I was director of the SOCO program in Vienna and distributing small pots of money among social researchers in the region, Ford Foundation money. And I wanted them to do assertive, pro-welfare state and pro-solidarity and redistribution research and politics. I was always treated with a lot of suspicion in the 1990s. There were very few people who wanted to go there because that was the left. And were we not just moving away from the left? Was democratic transition not a goodbye to all of that, right? And so that was the workers' struggle, but was also my struggle.
Interesting.
Yeah. So from that wonderful point, some people say the rise of far right, not only the East Europe, but we look at in the West Europe and the US as well as the other parts of the world, authoritarianism and the right-wing politics. The rise of the right is due to the failure of the left and the liberal in speaking to common concerns. I mean, if you listen to what the Trump supporters say, they say, okay, Trump, somehow Trump speak to us. What's your comment about the failure of the left and liberal in their relation to the common concerns?
So the big issue of the rise of the right is the failure of the left. I completely agree with that.
No, it's particularly in capturing and speaking to common concerns.
But this, of course, happens in a context of neoliberalization, of the exhaustion of welfare state politics. There was also ever less space for the left, right? So there's a wide context in which if you were a radical lefty, there were very little chances that you would get into the formal political arena and winning elections and so on. It was not good for your career, right? It was not good for my career to be Marxist in academia, even though it was okay for my career. But just like it was not good for a political career to be very much on the left. So you have a whole field that moves into an ever narrower, politics that does not allow a lot of democracy to happen. And it's in that context that the lack of trust and the delegitimization of the elites, etc., must be understood. Of course, that focuses primarily on social democracy and on the social democrats and on left liberalism, because they were supposed to do that, right? And increasingly they didn't do that.
Well, and the problem is that the left increasingly becomes liberal, which is pro-capitalist.
Yeah, exactly. So
there's nowhere for people to go.
But it's a very important point, because we keep, and that's also where theory of the East as a symbol plays a big role. Because in the West, we keep coming back to immigrants and to xenophobia. And of course, the right works that up every time it gets a chance to make a moral panic about it, right? That works electorally, but the undertow is very different. And the undertow is what I actually ran into in Eastern Europe. So at the time that there were no immigrants whatsoever in Eastern Europe, there was only mass emigration. And this is an important thing, because when you look at the map of Europe, all the areas of mass emigration are areas that are now on the neo-nationalist right, right? Whether there are immigrants or not. Immigrants work on the let us say purely conjunctural level of politics, but not on the deeper flow. And so theory from the East is at the same time a theory about the collapse of the left, the rise of the neo-nationalist right, including fascism, in a context where Westerners would be surprised to see no immigrants whatsoever, right? And basically no discussion about multiculturalism and all of that, but simply the collapse of the welfare state, collapse of socialism, the collapse of left politics, and the right-wing alternatives that come up organically. And then, of course, at a higher level, at a higher scale, ever more supported. That at a later moment moved to the West, right? So I remain, from the position of theory of the East, very skeptical about much of the research that's going on in the West about the right-wing turn. I think they are just hijacked by easy everyday concerns about immigration, etc., but they don't look enough about.
What I find interesting about a lot of, at least the anthropological work on the right wing, is that it tends to approach the right wing as some terrible other. Like there's the initial assumption that we ought to be afraid of these people, and of course we are. But let us figure out basically how they work so that they don't harm us more. Which is a terrible. That wouldn't work for studying any other native. That's a terrible ethnocentric position to begin with. And of course, it doesn't really lead to very good work. And I think what's interesting about theory of the East is it seems that you're saying, no, let's actually speak from these people, with these people. Which...
Yeah, exactly.
It seems much more fruitful to me.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great.
That's a great place to end.
Yeah. I learned a great deal, and I hope you also enjoyed this conversation. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you next time.
Common Concerns Podcast.